Well, it's better than the last one, whatever that's worth. What is going on, everybody, and welcome to my review for The Conjuring Last Rites. This is the 9th installment in the Conjuring Universe, and the 4th, and what they are saying is the final film in the franchise that will be centered around everyone's favorite demonologist couple, Ed and Loraine Warren. The story for this finale is focused on the last case that Ed and Loraine ever worked on as they come out of retirement to help save a family from an evil haunting that will force the duo to confront a terrifying entity from their storied past. My relationship with the Conjuring franchise is not what I would describe as a good one. I absolutely love the first film. It's one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and I think it is the best haunted house movie to ever be made, and I stand firmly on that opinion. But all of the movies that followed, my opinions on those range from either at best mixed or at worst some of my least favorite films in the entire genre of horror. I know a lot of people like The Conjuring 2, but that's a movie that's just never really done a whole lot for me. I never feel the need to revisit it. The Devil Made Me Do It, I actually wasn't that harsh on when it first came out, but I gave it a rewatch earlier this week, and I must have just been in a really good mood the first time that I saw that film, because upon this rewatch, I could not believe how bad it was. I got no enjoyment out of it whatsoever, but I damn sure am not a fan of the spin-off little sub-franchises that have come from these core Conjuring movies. I think for the most part, the Annabelle movies are just more mediocre slop, and movies like The Nun and The Nun 2 and The Curse of La Llorona are prime examples of probably why possession and religious horror are my two least favorite subgenres in all of horror. I think all three of those movies are dreadfully boring and just slogs to get through. They are some of my least favorite horror movies that have ever been made. So because of my overall feelings towards this franchise's output, and given that Michael Chavis is returning to the director's chair for this film, he's the same director that gave us The Curse of La Llorona, The Nun 2, and The Devil Made Me Do It, I was pretty close to a feeling of complete hopelessness, and I was struggling to find anything to get excited about for this film. But because I love that first movie so much, there's still that small part of me that is holding out for hope and believing that they can deliver an enjoyable enough movie that functions as a, at the very least, passable send-off for Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, because though I have a ton of frustrations with this franchise, those two have never been one of them. Well, you can take all of my hopes and dreams and flush them right down the toilet, because this is not anything close to the satisfying conclusion that I had hoped for. This was unfortunately just another run-in-the-mill, mediocre on-brand Conjuring movie that will serve just fine as the backdrop for a couple of 14-year-olds' first date to the movies. But for me, it is just not a viewing experience and a level of mediocrity that I can tolerate any longer. But before I get into my positives and negatives, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel as well for more movie reviews and content. Make sure to get down in the comments below as well and tell me what your thoughts are on the Conjuring franchise, because even though I know I am not their biggest fan, there are a lot of people out there that do love these movies, so I would love to hear a differing opinion on them. Now let's get into the review. So starting with the positives, and even though I don't think this movie is awful or like the worst thing I've ever seen, I am having a hard time coming up with things to tell you that I liked about this movie, because the things that this film does well are things that the Conjuring movies have always done well, at least the core 4 movies within the franchise. And so I don't even find them all that interesting to talk about or feel the need to give them much praise for. Like, once again, I think Ed and Loraine are done very well in this movie. I know the Warrens in real life are very polarizing and controversial figures, but as far as their fictional counterparts go, I've always found them to be some of the most enjoyable heroes in horror to watch. The chemistry between Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga is always off the charts. They're always written very well. You can really feel the romance between the two of them. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that they're not a married couple in real life, because they're just so good at portraying a happy marriage on screen, even though they're going through everything that they're going
going through, and they always seem to manage to bring a lot of heart to these movies and get you invested in them as characters, even though the movie around them more oftentimes than not feels very bland and overproduced. Mia Tomlinson as an adult Judy Warren is a fine addition, as well as is her fiance Tony, played by Ben Hardy. I think the relationship was done well and is very sweet, and I really enjoyed the parallels that are drawn between their just now blossoming relationship to the early days of Ed and Lorraine's relationship. I'm realizing right now as I'm talking about this that if you remove the names and only heard the positives that I have for this movie, you would think that I was reviewing a full-on romance and not a horror film. If there's anyone out there that's trying to do a remake of Ghost, I strongly recommend you look into the people that have written the last few Conjuring movies, because they don't seem to be too good at the horror side of things. But if you need a romance written that has a paranormal element, they got that shit nailed. You get some other familiar faces of the franchise in here as well. Of course, you got Steve Coulter as Father Gordon and Shannon Kook as Drew Thomas. I'm pretty sure they've been in all of the Conjuring films thus far. But you even get John Brotherton showing back up as Brad for the first time since the original Conjuring film. And I like having them here because there's some moments in this film with those characters that made it really feel like a celebration of the Conjuring franchise. And even though I'm not a humongous fan, I do like those moments because given that this is the finale of the core films, it's nice to get that feeling of nostalgia, even though I know a lot of people consider that to be cheap. I think it was effective for a movie like this, and I wish we could have got some more moments like that throughout the entire movie instead of them kind of just being loaded in the first half. But nonetheless, when it was kind of just celebrating these movies and especially reminding me of that original movie and what I love about it so much, I do think it is some of this film's best moments. Moving on to the negatives now, and what upsets me so much about this movie is that I just don't see any growth happening. You know, if The Devil Made Me Do It didn't exist and this was the third and final film in a Conjuring trilogy, I don't think I would be as frustrated with this movie as I am. But The Devil Made Me Do It does exist, and I really wanted to see them make a lot of improvements from that film and kind of get back to the roots of that original classic that I love so much. And though I think there was a bit of a spark and an idea to do so, they succumbed to all of the classic cliches that I think have tanked this subgenre. And ironically, they are cliches that I think they created and influenced, and they kind of just become a copy of the movies that have copied them over the last decade. We are now 9 movies into this universe, and I feel like all of the major criticisms that I have had for the films within this franchise have never been addressed or fixed, dating back to the first Annabelle. One of my biggest gripes with these movies is the implementation of CGI and how much it increases from movie to movie. What I love so much about that first Conjuring was the great practical effects work done by James Wan. It felt really grounded and it felt real, which I think is the best way to go about a possession horror, religious horror type movie. But ever since Annabelle and The Conjuring 2, they just keep implementing more and more CGI, and that can be all well and good, but the CGI has always looked absolutely awful. I can't think of one shot in this entire franchise that was using CGI that was at an acceptable level of quality. Like, what the fuck is this? This shot is in the trailer. They thought this was acceptable to show and something that would get you excited to come check out this movie, and it looks absolutely terrible. And the scene that this takes place in is another example of a moment in this movie, in this franchise, where a scare gets completely ruined and all of the tension that they are able to successfully build gets completely flatlined because what shows up on your screen looks like a fucking cartoon. This has been a problem since movie 2, and it continues to be a problem to this day with movie 9. It feels like the second they decided to turn this into a franchise and a universe, they just went like, yeah, you know, all the stuff that we did that people liked about that original film, let's get rid of that shit and just Fast and Furious this bitch, because every movie since then, they just go way too big for their own capabilities. Hell, in The Devil Made Me Do It, they have Loraine Warren running around looking like the Scarlet Witch from the fucking Avengers. And you would have thought that since seemingly nobody enjoyed that movie, that they would have taken that criticism to heart, went back to the drawing board, sat down, and asked themselves, how can we deliver a conclusion to this chapter of the Conjuring universe that will satisfy the core fan base, the people that love the OG so much? But no, it's just another heaping of mediocre Conjuring bullshit that succumbs to the very cliches of the modern possession horror landscape that they fucking helped create. they now feel more like they are copying the movies that have spent the last decade copying them. And it's just so unfortunate and frustrating to see. All right, now that the CGI rant is out of the way, I'm also just not a big fan of the story here. The movie kicks off with a flashback to the day that Judy was born. They introduce this big plot point so that it can come back in a full circle way at the end of the movie. And I just don't think it worked all that well for me. I think this would have been far better if it was something that had been established in like the first or second movie and we've seen it kind of progress and build up to this moment to kind of get that epic finale feeling that it would have had. But introducing it in this movie to end it later in the movie, it's too big of a story to try to grab a hold of for one movie to handle, so it doesn't really land with me. An element that they do try to gather back from that original film is just having the Warrens get back to the basics and helping a big family deal with a haunting and save them from it. But they don't spend a lot of time together. In that original film, the Warrens kind of fully almost move in with the family and they're spending a ton of time with them, and you feel connected and that you feel like they're connected and that they're invested in one another. You don't ever really feel that with this new family in Last Rite. It's hard for me to get invested in the family that is being haunted because the Warrens just don't seem to be that invested in them either. So even the one thing that they do try to recapture from the original, I don't think they do so all that successfully. My last criticism in regards to the story here is that it feels like for a lot of the movie, Loraine Warren is really forced to share the stage or either that or fully take a back seat to the character of Judy Warren. And even though I do like Judy in this movie, being that this is a finale and supposedly the last time we will see Vera Farmiga as this character, I would have liked to have seen her get more of a focus. And you don't feel this way about Ed. Patrick Wilson still gets a ton of screen time and focus in this movie. And not that Loraine doesn't get screen time, but for a lot of that, she's kind of just standing around, staring off into the distance. And all of the typical signature moments we would get from her in a Conjuring movie just get given to Judy. And so it felt like in order to prop up Judy, they kind of just sacrificed Loraine. And if this is the last time we see her, I don't think that that's a satisfying way for her to go out with the audience or the fan base. So yeah, if this was a situation where I knew I would be seeing this character with this performance again someday, then it wouldn't bother me as much as it does this kind of passing of the torch thing that they're doing. But since assumably this is the end, this has been a pretty iconic character for the last decade and a half, and for this to be the last we see of them is just kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth because kind of like a sports analogy here where it's like you have this iconic player in this sport and their final game just they're not playing well, it just looks awful and they look old and they kind of just go out with a whimper. That's kind of how I felt about the character of Loraine Warren in this movie. Not calling her old, she still looks great, and that was kind of that's just the sports analogy aspect of it. But being that this is the end, it's not the way I would like to see her go out. Luckily, this movie, the last 3 minutes, it does end on a very sweet note. I honestly think the last 3 minutes of this movie is really the only undeniably good part of the movie. But 3 minutes, a good movie, it does not make. And so the character of Loraine and what they do with her throughout the entirety of the rest of the film, very underwhelming and unsatisfying, much like a lot of the other aspects in this film and franchise. So there you guys have it. Those are all of my thoughts on The Conjuring Last Rites. My anger towards this film is definitely coming more from my frustration with the franchise as a whole, more than it is anything to do with this movie in a vacuum. Because like I said, this is not the worst thing I've ever seen. It's better than The Devil Made Me Do It. It would be much more palatable if The Devil Made Me Do It didn't exist, but that is not the case, unfortunately. And it sucks to see a lot of the same flaws and issues that plagued that movie rear their ugly head once again for the Last Rites. If you are a Conjuring fan or if you've seen all of the Conjuring movies, then you pretty much know already what you're going to be getting with this film. And so, I can recommend you stream it. You probably do want to see the conclusion to the core set of Conjuring films if you've been along for the ride this entire time. Maybe you'll like it more than me. I mean, clearly people do enjoy these movies. They are always a box office success. They don't do well critically, but audiences tend to be more favorable towards them. I'm just kind of over it, I've always, because I love that original film so much, feel like I try to give this franchise the benefit of the doubt. But as the years have gone on and I've rewatched some of these movies more, I've just come to the conclusion that I just don't like this franchise. I don't think it should be a franchise that exists. It should have just been a one and done movie, but that's obviously not the world we live in anymore. The second you get a success, especially in the horror movie, it's kind of always been this way. You got to make 8 more. And it's just, you get diminishing returns with each one, in my opinion. So, possession horror is just not for me. Religious horror is the same boat. Like, I just don't enjoy what we get from that subgenre anymore. And I think the Conjuring franchise is a big reason as to why, we get movies like The Exorcist Believer. A lot of the tropes that plague those movies are directly influenced by the Conjuring franchise, and I think that it just has plagued the subgenre as a whole. But let me know what you guys think about the Conjuring franchise and Last Rite down in the comments below. Make sure to also give the video a like and subscribe to the channel as well for more movie reviews and content. I can't wait to see you guys in my next one. Peace.